Hi, I'm John DeDakis. I'm a novelist, a coach, writing coach, a manuscript editor, and a former editor on CNN's The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer. You're one to one with me, and I'm one to one with novelist Amy Pendino.
Hello,
Hi, how are you, Amy? It's good to see you. Uh,
doing
let me
really well.
let me just tell people that you love horses, you
Yes,
love to write, and you've
yes.
combined those two things. So we're going to talk about the two novels that you've written.
Okay.
But you're also a former English teacher in middle schoolers. So that yeah, you have to be a little squirrely to do that. And then we're also going to talk about your musical career and your when the time you were a backup singer for an international star. But we won't start there. Uh,
Good.
so you're you're from Minnesota.
I am.
Your books are set in Iowa though,
Correct.
and you are now in Arizona.
At the moment, yes,
A moving target is harder to hit.
that's the idea.
So what are you doing in Arizona?
Well, John, thanks first of all for inviting me to speak with you. We've struck up a friendship together through a couple different workshops, and I've very much enjoyed getting to know you and have caught up completely with all of your writing. Love your main character. We're in Arizona right now, kind of being on an adventure. Uh, now that I'm no longer in the classroom, my husband and I, take our riding horses and every year go to a different place to try to explore the United States with our horses on horseback. So right now we're in Arizona. Earlier this week, we climbed a mountain with a group and our horses, and my sitting area still hurts from that. Yes, that was one of the spots that we went across.
That was a
Uh,
that looks like it was a pretty treacherous moment there.
um, let me just say, my horse Java and I, we were on the outer edge of that. There, we were not where those guys are. Those are friends of ours, and this was a moment where we were kind of going through a place that didn't wasn't on the map. So we were having a lot of fun with that.
Well, and here's sort of the panorama that you can
Yes,
get a sense of it.
yes.
And so, what part of Arizona are you in right now?
These are the red rocks of Sedona. So we went through, it's called Turkey Creek, and we climbed up to the top where once upon a time a Jeep got stuck and was used as a local landmark. And this picture is taken right from the top of the mountain where the Jeep was perched for a number of years. I hear they finally took it out by helicopter. But as you can see, we are up right at the top, and it was absolutely breathtaking.
Wow. Okay. Well, you're also a novelist,
Yes.
and so I want to. Um, I do have a question about horses, though,
Oh,
because
okay.
in your most recent novel, Wild Horses, and we're going to talk about both your novels. There's a just a little line. Yes, there it is, and I'll show it full in just a minute. Patience, patience. Um, there's a moment where you mentioned that you should not pat a horse between the eyes. What's I don't
Correct.
my wife's been around horses. She'd never heard that before, and I hadn't. So what's the thinking about that?
So you may have heard before, you never walk behind a horse,
Right.
and that's the bookend to that little motto. Horses were constructed with their eyes on their sides, so they have about 340 degrees sight, and right in front of them, they're not able to see what's coming directly at their nose, which is the first place that people would like to pat when they're meeting a horse. Um, some are fine with it, but I was always told when I was introduced to horses about 20 years ago that you don't want to come straight on at them, and you certainly don't want to come up straight behind them.
Yeah, and if you come straight at them, is it because that's a blind spot? If they're
Yes,
touched, they start.
yes,
They startle.
yes, yes. And they
Ah,
are flight animals, and as they're bigger than we are, they tend to mow down whatever is in front of them. And thankfully, that's never happened to me, although I have been pushed over a number of times by baby horses. Um, on our little farm in Minnesota, up until this last 2 years, we had baby foals born every year, over 30 little horses, and that was a great adventure for our family. But they are also capable of wreaking havoc and damage. So, yeah, I have had black and blue marks from that.
Well, let's take a look at your, let's talk about your novels. Your first one
Yeah,
is The Witness Tree,
yeah.
and I've read both of your novels. They're delightful.
Thank you. Thank
You're a
you.
very good writer.
Well,
And
thank you.
so tell us a little bit about The Witness Tree, which won an award, and tell us about that too.
It actually won 3 awards. It won an Ippy Award, and I went to New York and got a medal for that. That's the one you see on the front. And it also won a Ben Franklin Silver, Independent Book Publishers Association, and the silver with the Midwestern Independent Publishers Association. So it did get a
Ah,
lot of recognition, which I was absolutely thrilled about. The picture you see on the cover is a depiction of a tree I saw in our friend's field. My friend lives in Iowa. I went to visit her, and I noticed that this tree was standing by itself right in the middle of a field. And I asked her about it, and she had just recently moved to Iowa, and she said, I don't know, but people say we shouldn't cut it down. And that made no sense. I asked her why, and she said, well, and she leaned in, they tell us it's cursed. And I just started giggling because what tree would be cursed? Well, we started thinking about that. There may have been wine involved. And we came up with a little scenario of how a tree would get a curse on it. And as I found out later, a witness tree is an actual thing. It's used or was used, maybe still is, between sections of farmland owned by different people so that you could see where the demarcation line was before they had GPS or satellite.
mhm. And so it's a series.
Yep.
Tell us about your protagonist.
Danny Holden is a person who, after 9/11, decided she needed to do something different with her life. Small town girl by heart, but she was brought up in a suburb of Minneapolis, as I was. Where I grew up when I was a little girl, it was a small town, and I loved that flavor. But as I got older, more and more people came in, and that's kind of a discomforting feeling for me. I find myself more relaxed when I'm out in those open spaces. And that was the same for my character, Danny. She had to go to a place where her spirit could be free. And she found herself, of all places, on a farm,
Mhm.
trying a career that most would not associate with, I guess, women, which is kind of stereotypical, but I kind of like to push edges a little bit,
Mhm.
boundaries. So she started a small section that she rented to do a little farming. And that story is interspersed with that supposed curse on that tree. A former resident that also lived in that small town, um, her name was Lily Bradstreet. She was the reason that the tree was cursed. And that brings in elements of racism and migrant farmers and some of my more serious topics that I wanted to weave in.
Okay. And so then the most recent one that just came out
Mm-hmm.
is called Wild Horses.
Yes,
And so that picks up where the witness tree leaves off. And
yes.
what can you tell us about that? What's happening with Danny in this one?
Well, Danny's still at home, but she's no longer able to farm, still in that same small Iowa town. And she gets involved with uh, rescuing an old race horse that was destined for the slaughterhouse. I mentioned earlier, John, that I had helped foal out a number of baby horses. Our family has been involved on the fringes of race horsing. If I guess, is that a verb? Is that?
It is
Well,
now.
anyway, it
It
is
is
now.
now.
It is now. And we've always been really concerned about what would happen to the animal after its current job running would be done. What would you want to do? We wanted to bring up our animals to make sure that they could have a long and satisfying life. And unfortunately, that's not the case with a lot of horses.
Mhm.
If a person breeds a horse and it's not what they want, often these horses are sent to slaughter in Canada or Mexico. And it just breaks my heart. We were on the trail once and we got a phone call. I don't know how it came through the cell. And someone said, "Hey, do you know anything about this horse?" Race horses used to be tattooed on their lips. So when they would go to the races, people could see that, no, you're not trying to scam anything. Our little horse that we had just sold to a barrel racer, we were told, was on a kill lot down in Missouri.
Mhm.
So we had to pop down there and get her, which we were happy to do. But it just sticks with me. I should say, too, Danny's interaction with these horses leads her into another aspect of trafficking. She's asked by a friend of a friend, in order to make some money, she agrees to do this, to take a load of animals to slaughter. And these are food animals. This is something that's done all the time. And again, I found out that there aren't necessarily regulations in place for those animals, but that's a sidebar.
Mhm.
She doesn't know that when she's taking this big trailer full of animals, that there's actually something else hidden back in the trailer with the animals, their stench, their smell,
Mhm.
covering what she's hauling. Um, it's something that's been happening a lot in our small towns, and that theme is on drug use, drug abuse, and drug trafficking.
Yeah. So there are a couple of things that I want to read just to give people a
Okay.
sample
Oh,
of
thank you.
how good you are, because and I want to, you've taught kids how to do this, but you're able to do it and not just teach it. So here are just a couple of little examples.
Thank you.
Hold on. That's not the one I wanted to read. Okay. Her phone rang into the evening silence, as shocking as the snap of a wet washcloth on hot skin. That was a nice moment. Or
Thank you.
the corner of Jim's upper lip started to curl, but he was able to arrange the rest of his mouth into a smile. He tried again, like a shark attempting to convince a minnow that he was trustworthy.
I don't
And
like Jim.
yeah, well, I want to talk about that, but in a minute. Hold on.
Okay.
There are just a couple of more quick examples that I want to give because these babies just popped out. Um, this is at I think it's at the at a diner or a cafe, where a couple of women are now sitting at a table with a couple of men.
Hmm.
The women's presence added decorum, new points of view, and an expanded topic list no longer limited to crop prices, field conditions, and sports scores. What point are you trying to make there, ma'am?
In the small town I grew up in, there was a little diner, and the farmers and the bus drivers would gather there every morning. And they had coffee cups with their names on them embossed, just like in the witness tree. And newcomers, like my own father, would come in to get a cup of coffee, and he was given styrofoam. Well, I remember going in with Dad and listening. I guess I've always been kind of, well, not a stalker, but curious about other people and how they interact. And I remember them talking about, my dad was a coach, so they talk about what he had been coaching, but then they would talk about farm stuff and bus stuff. And I thought, no wonder there are no women here. There's nothing interesting.
Well, are you making look, as a writer, you have to get into the head not only of your protagonist, but other characters too. And hopefully,
Right.
if your book is interesting, it's populated
Yes,
with people from different backgrounds, cultures, genders, all those kinds of things. So,
absolutely.
what have you learned about being able to write a male character? Has that in any way impacted your understanding of this species?
Understanding, no. Mimicking, I hope so. Again, I do like to pay attention to how people speak and what they say and how they say it. So there's a spot in the witness tree where one of the guys from that sports talking group, that farm talking group, goes in to get a motor repaired. And the way that the men interact to one another about getting that engine repaired is something I lifted right from what we call the Fleet Farm. It's a
Mm-hmm.
farm store
Uh-huh.
in my area. And I remember sitting at the counter waiting my turn and listening to the way that the men talk to one another and the pauses and the nods. And I copied it.
Well, and that's why it's authentic feeling. And
Well, I hope.
it's not like you're necessarily making any judgments per se.
Nope.
You're making observations and then
Yes,
capturing them and putting them on the page.
that's what I hope.
I wanted to give one more quick example of
Okay.
the way you write.
Okay.
This is talking about this mare that Danny rescues. The bones in her ribs jutted out like ladder rungs.
Mm-hmm.
Very vivid, very vivid.
Very sad.
Tell us about your process and how you made this transition from being an English teacher to being a novelist.
I've always been a storyteller and a story seeker. I remember even as a young little girl thinking about stories and what would I say or what if I was the star of that. And when I was in second grade, I started writing these things down. That is a fascinating read if you would like to be attuned to that. I talk
Mhm.
about Girl Scouts and what my mother wore and what we had for dinner. It was titillating. But from that point, as long from that point on, I've been writing on paper or now on the computer. I went to poetry as a young mom because I didn't have time to do bigger pieces. I worked on short stories, which I think short stories are the hardest genre
They
that
are.
there
They
is.
really are. Yeah.
Ugh. I've had a short story published, and I don't know how. I think it's pretty good, but when I look at it in the anthology, I think, oh, turn. Um, the novel to me is something that I can process, digest, think about all the time. And that's why I believe that writing is 100% of the time. I'm constantly writing. Do I have my hands on the keyboard? Am I writing on a piece of paper? No. But I'm constantly sifting what I see, what I think, what I hear, what I read. Um, and to that end, I think it was a natural segue from a classroom situation, helping others to uncover their voices, even though they're 11, 12, 13. They had a voice. And to give myself the daily time and space for my own voice then to emerge. I'll have to say that part has always been fun. I like to do the writing, the drafting, and you and I have talked about this at length. It's the editing and the revision that is just enough to send one over that mountain without a horse.
um, Talk about the time that you spent as an English teacher in middle
Mm-hmm.
school. We are
Yeah.
now in a situation in our
Oh,
country where books are being banned,
yeah.
and where young people. I mean, I heard just yesterday that teachers are being punished and suspended because
Mm-hmm.
some of their students are drawing pictures of rainbows, these treacherous little symbols.
Mm-hmm.
The school. So I'm wondering. I'm certain we didn't plan to talk about this, and
Mm-hmm.
I hate to put you on the spot, but
I'm ready.
well, go for it. Tell me what your job is not at stake. So now you can talk about what it's like to be in the classroom and
Mm-hmm.
being under the gun from administrators and so on about
Mm-hmm.
being politically correct or incorrect and all that. So the
Mm-hmm.
floor is yours, ma'am.
Okay, how much time do we have?
Oh, till Wednesday.
Oh, yay. Um, 25 years in the classroom. When I first went in, I remember before that first bell rang, I was huddled in the ladies' room praying, dear Lord, please help me get through this. And from that moment, it unfolded like a blossom. I loved interacting with the kids. We had time to get into stories and writing and what made a character a sound good character, believable character, what that meant to them in their lives, how it had a place in history, how a person had a voice, even though perhaps they weren't represented in their textbooks in social studies. But by the time I left, things had changed. And it was a blessing that I got out right before COVID, because I think mentally and certainly spiritually, I don't think I could have handled what my comrades, colleagues, continue to do day by day, hour by hour in the classroom with limited resources. I mean, I remember,
Yeah,
John, I had,
go ahead. I was going to say, what is it that they have to deal with that was so
well,
frustrating for you?
when I left, it was just, I never had enough copies of anything to hand out to my kids. We weren't so much told what to teach as to be sure to include this viewpoint. Of course, it's always a matter of balancing those spinning plates and what should have the most attention. So that was in a constant state of amendment, but it ended up being more of a reactive situation. The longer I taught, we were more reacting to instead of responding or having a planned response for the materials that we were sharing. I feel now that the perception of most is still not correct. We would invite parents and council members to come into our classrooms to see what we were dealing with, what we were learning ourselves in the laboratory of the classroom. And I feel frustrated as much now as I did before that so much regulation, so many laws are passed, so much money is appropriated by people who have never been in the classroom since they graduated at the age of 18. Public school has changed. Ultimately, I believe that a teacher is a person with a student's best interest at heart, and they know, or they wouldn't be a teacher, what it is to touch that student's life in a way that's meaningful and helps that kid move forward. I feel like is being taken away.
You were in the classroom for 25 years, which means some of those kids are grown now. So
Yeah.
do you keep in touch with former
Yes,
students?
I
Tell me
do.
about that.
Oh, that's so fun. The other thing that has been fun is that I've had a couple of grandkids of kids, and that's just been wild. The kids that I've kept up with, kept adults, former students, are just as lively and engaging and curious people now. And I still see sparks of that little person that I saw before. What's really weird is that I remember where they sit, and I usually know their handwriting too.
Oh my goodness. Oh my
I know.
goodness. A lot. I mean, my mom was a third grade teacher, and she
Yes.
brought home stories of,
Yes.
deprivation and
Yes.
lots of, alcoholism at home. I mean, as a teacher, and especially a teacher of middle school students, you must have had to deal with a lot of social,
Yes.
psychological issues as well.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
I think ultimately parenting is a position of balancing attention. Our young people need certain things that are only appropriate for their little soul. And I think the balance is between neglect and helicoptering. We would have, in many instances, kids that wore the same outfits every day, kids that didn't get their homework done at home, kids whose families didn't come to conference, balanced against ones whose parents would call 20 minutes after class because I had not yet uploaded the grades into the electronic grade system. So that kind of constant hovering.
Mm-hmm.
With my own adult children and my 4 grandchildren, and they're pretty good about when I offer advice that's not asked for, I always just say, hey, it's a one at a time situation. What do they need now? What is best for them moving forward? And then back up and see what happens. And I guess I wish that would be the case in our schools, in our public schools as well.
Did you have to deal with book banning parents?
One of my dear friends, I'll call her Tippy, she's the school librarian, and she did. In fact, she ended up going in front of the school board right before I graduated, but right before I left. And she had to share reasons for her inclusion of a certain novel in our library. And what was frustrating kind of echoes what I was trying to convey a moment earlier. The parent who brought that book to the school board's attention.
Which book are we talking about?
It was, oh my stars, it's the one, oh, I wish I could say it, John. I can't remember. I know the cover, Angela, a young Black American teenage girl who, it was a school book. Angela, I can't remember.
Okay. All right. Well, talk about
the mother never read the book. The child had brought it home. It tumbled out of the backpack and, was over there looking at it and noticed some swear words in it and the word sex, which, that and FART are the things that seventh graders like to talk about. The mother immediately went to the school board and it became an issue. Ultimately, the school board sided with Tippy and the book was allowed. So it's just kind of that being backed into the corner rather than having a conversation about something. Hey, teacher, why do you have this in where did that come from? What was the idea behind that? Great, let's talk about it. Please, let's talk about it rather than.
Yeah. Have things gotten worse since you left?
John, I have to tell you, I oftentimes think about and pray for my friends that are still teaching, but it hurts. It hurts. I don't know if I just take too much inside, but I have not kept up with a lot of things that they're going through in the last couple of years. I know COVID really, really took big bites out of their souls, and yet, bless them, they are still going.
Now, the place where you taught, was it a red state, a blue state, or a community?
In my state, outlying is very conservative, but right in the center where I taught is pretty liberal. We have a mix of both, and in a typical Midwestern way, most are reticent to share. So it was more of the side conversations or the little comments on, anonymous Facebook that we would learn about, some of the things, echoes of what had been happening in school. Midwesterners like to go about things sideways. And
yes, I'm from Wisconsin. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
You do.
Let's switch gears and talk about writing. Tell us about your process. Are you a planner, a pantser? How do you do your research?
My first book was completely for fun, did not plan it, other than seeing that tree with my girlfriend and thinking, well, why would that be? Thank you for that. That one, I just remember sitting outside underneath my own tree in the backyard, giggling and laughing and writing. And once in a while, I have to admit, I even wrote during a prep period, maybe once, at school, and a colleague coming in and saying, Amy, who are you talking to? Because I was just having so much fun. That one went on very easy to edit and revise. But the next one, Wild Horses, was very wild. That one I planned. That one I took apart and had a plot map on my wall. I did a lot of research into the animal slaughter, into drug trafficking. That one stuck. That one was like peeling the cartilage off of your chicken bone. I mean, one just took me. I was constantly tugging and finding and tugging. And I have to say, am I completely happy with it? No. Am I done with it? Yeah. That one's done.
It sounds like you much prefer the seat of the pants approach.
Well, that's what I'm doing for the third book. Now, this one doesn't have a title yet, but my main character, Danny, is still in the same small town, but she's accepted a position as a county sheriff dispatcher. And I'm fortunate enough to know a person who has spent time in that occupation. So she's been helping me with the reality of that situation. But Danny stumbles upon a crime, and because of her new position as a dispatcher, she's prohibited from investigating that crime, but it happened right next door. So that kind of twist and pull. Also, Danny had a friend through the first two books named Donna, kind of a wild one. I love Donna. Well, I did love Donna. Well,
Yeah, don't give it away. Don't give things away now.
Donna will reappear in book 3.
Okay.
And yeah.
Well, and that's actually, I think that's one of the things that makes a series interesting, especially, if your characters undergo change.
Yes.
And I think it's safe to say that the relationship between Danny and Donna evolves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's like real life.
Yes. Yeah.
Are you drawing from personal experience?
No. I'm drawing from what ifs. And you had asked about my processing.
Yeah.
For this book, it's kind of been a hybrid. I'm doing a lot of what ifs, and I'm doing a lot of thinking and considering and wondering, a little bit of outlining. It hasn't taken over the whole wall yet.
Mm-hmm.
But with your series, John, with Lark, I mean, they kind of come to life before your eyes. Lark has changed in your writing as well and become more confident and more able to express herself. And I see that from my own Danny. She's gaining a stronger foothold. She's finding a place to stand on that feels true to her. I don't plan for it, but when it pops up, I try to grab it and write it down.
I get the impression that you're, in a sense, experimenting creatively, so that you started
Yes.
seat of the pants, then you tried plotting it, and now you're maybe finding a hybrid where, you're finding your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
That's accurate?
Exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The thing that's terrifying, though, and I know you know this as well, is I know what lies ahead.
Right. You played keyboards for a
I did.
local band. What's your
Yep.
musical background and interest?
Played the piano since I was little. My grandmother was in a dance band in the 1940s on the radio and played with her brothers. And I didn't know that until I was 18 years old, and I tried out for a band and was accepted. And I spent the next 5 years every weekend up on a stage. At that point, you could smoke. That's how old I am. And peering through the smoke and watching people dance and go to the bar. And I think a lot of my human observation information came from that situation. Very interesting to see people when their guard has been let down.
What were some of the surprise takeaways from that experience?
How uncomfortable I was at first to consider myself an entertainer. At first, I was a musician, and I played classically. We have a venue in Minneapolis called Northrop Auditorium, and we have Orchestra Hall, and I've played at both.
Oh my!
In groups, but classical. And when I went away to college that first year, I figured out very quickly that I was a very small fishy in a big pond, and I wanted to play just for me. So that's when I started to, again, almost like in writing, go away from the formulaic, and I just went from the soul. And that's how my grandma played. She didn't read music. She just played by ear, and that's how I play right now as well. The band music, it's 1-4-5. You can play pretty much anything. I know you're a drummer, but for the musical part of it, it's fun. It's
what kind of music is it that you played?
I prefer the standards. I prefer jazz. I like some new age stuff, and I just absolutely love the 60s and 70s.
And what were some of your takeaways from watching the crowd?
Watching the crowd, it was interesting to see what they thought I couldn't see. So sitting up there behind the perch of all the keyboards, I had 3 of them there, and the microphone. And I think people think they get away with a lot more than they do, which was very helpful to be an English teacher of 7th graders, because they always thought they were going to get away from it. And I would oftentimes hear, does she have eyes in the back of her head? How
Well,
did she?
what kind of stuff were you observing?
With the dancers, I guess it's more of the courtship rituals that I would see and think about and think, well, that didn't work, did it? Or, ooh, smooth. So that was kind of fun.
Talk about this time that you were a backup singer
Yes,
for an international star. Who was the star?
Barry Manilow. He came to the St. Paul Civic Center in 1982. That was that year I mentioned that I was training classically, and I also had been invited to sing in a more of an elite choir. And when he came to town, we were asked to be the backup. So that was really cool. A very driven performer, very perfectionistic. We went over just small slices of the songs that we sang with him. And I don't remember going through, I think we sang 3 songs with him, any one of them completely through until the performance in the round at St. Paul Civic Center. It was wonderful.
What was he like as a person to work with?
Very direct, very conscious of time. We're going to do this, we're going to do this. Okay, stop. Okay, we're going to that. Do that part again. You need to be louder. I mean, he was a director. He was a manager, producer of that event. It was cool.
But it was only once that you did that, so that apparently it didn't whet your appetite for the big time.
Not that good of a singer, John.
Oh,
My best singing is on the back of my horse. We've been practicing the one from Mr. Ed, you know, a horse is a horse, of course, of course.
Okay, fair enough. Let me just make sure I'm covering all the ground I want to cover here.
Uh-oh.
You've been in the classroom a long time. You are now, getting your writing chops together. What do you know? What have you learned now, or what do you know now that you wish you'd known when you first started writing fiction?
Well, that's kind of a life question, John. And you and I have had lots of life conversations in our short friendship. Grace is a word that springs to mind when you ask that question. I find it easier to share grace with others, and I find it easier to forgive others. I obsess over my own imperfections, and I feel unworthy of grace. And especially kind of appropriate now, it being the Christian season of Lent, to think about our mortality, our imperfection, how we can never be good enough. It's the opportunity, and I remind myself of that all the time, to accept the gift. And as I wrote on the back of my second book, think about there are instances where there aren't strings attached. And it's okay to take a compliment. It's great to have a hug. It's wonderful, lovely to have a conversation where you feel heard. And in my writing, I'm learning how to extend that same grace to myself. Learning.
In that you mentioned that you got, I think, at least three awards for the Witness Tree.
Yes.
I entered those same contests and I didn't get anything. So just saying, you're doing fine. But doesn't that add to the pressure?
Yes, a lot.
In what way?
To meet an expectation is a difficult thing for someone who suffers from perfectionism. And to be able to give myself the grace to lower the expectation and have fun and be overheard giggling to myself over something a character said, that's the joy that I need to remind myself of as a writer, to have that joy every day.
Talk a little bit about, I mean, I believe you're self-published as opposed to traditionally published, correct?
The first book, The Witness Tree, was published by Wise Inc. It's a Minneapolis group, kind of a hybrid boutique publishing company, but I have retained the rights to that book and it will be reissued through my own brand. The second book Wild Horses, and the third are completely self-published. And other than the artwork and the formatting, every other mistake is my own.
Talk about
Mhm.
self-publishing and
Yeah,
what you've learned from that experience, because there is now no excuse for anybody if they have a book
yeah,
idea. There's no
yeah,
reason why it one way or the other it can't get out there.
yeah,
But self-publishing is still a challenge because there are
yeah,
something like 20,000 books a day that are
a
published.
day.
So how do you bubble to the surface? How do you get people to know about you?
One of my greatest joys in life, other than being a mom, being a wife, being a horse lady, I just love reading, and I love talking about books with other readers. I've been in a reading group since I think 92 was
Wow.
when the group was first started. And even when members are out of town, we can Zoom with one another and keep track of one another. So writing for me is engaging with that reader, that book club reader who wants an enjoyable experience and then the opportunity to say, but why did you feel like, what did I get that? So if I can continue to satisfy those discussion questions, and in my first book, I've been to over 50 book clubs.
Wow.
So either by Zoom or in person, in the last 4 years, have gone all over, just talking about, well, books.
How did you get those gigs?
Um, my people in my group, 8 women, have also other book groups. So then I went to theirs, and so on and so on, like that brick commercial, remember back in the day, and so on and so on.
Right.
Some of them were, I don't know where they came from, neighbors, colleagues when I used to work. I don't work anymore.
You work
Um,
hard. You just have fun,
um,
so it doesn't feel like work.
you know what? Isn't that great?
Yep.
I'm so lucky.
Yeah, me too.
I forgot the question now.
Well, the question has to do with marketing, and I'll put a finer
Oh,
point on it because a lot of marketing depends on your personality type, I think.
mhm,
And
mhm.
if I'm not mistaken, you're an extrovert. Would that be accurate? Really? I can never tell. My wife is an introvert, but she keeps talking to me, so I can never tell. So you've got me fooled. But if you're an introvert, how do you go about being able to connect with other people if that's not your comfort zone?
So I think, again, this is another touch point between you and I. You, in your career in broadcasting, have had the opportunity to be a face and to present information and to share. To me, it's a mask. You put on that mask and you become that person. I have a good friend in Minneapolis, Lorna Landvik, and she's a fabulous writer, very well known. She is nervous as far as the marketing part to get out there, and you'd never expect it. She's an entertainer. She's a stand-up comedian, um, and we've talked at length about that mask and the position you put yourself in when you go out and start the conversation with a person to try to find a common ground. I think I got good at it teaching. I think once I learned that we were all in it together, these 34 little faces looking back at me, we could do it together as a journey moving forward. That by the time the last bell rang and I could go home, that was my recharging time as an introvert. Marketing is extremely extroverted. So that's the mask that goes on. And then the recharge, that's riding the horse up in the mountain and not answering when someone talks.
Okay. So there's your website.
Yay!
I'm assuming that's how people can contact you. There's probably a portal on
Yes,
your website,
yes,
amypendino.com, correct?
yep, yep.
So when do you suspect that your third book will be coming out?
Hmm. I'm going to aim for October 2024.
Okay.
October 21st. 2024.
Oh,
How about
well,
that?
now we're getting specific here.
Hmm.
Okay, excellent. Any
Around 9 o'clock.
any anything else you want to add?
John, I have so enjoyed getting to know you. We have had some commonalities in our writing and in our kids and in our uh, sharing our information with other people in that professional way. And it's just a joy to visit with you again. Thank you so much for spending time with me.
Well, thank you for spending time with me. We've been talking with Amy Pendino. She's in Arizona now, but she also spends time in Minnesota. She loves horses. She's a very good writer, and I hope you'll take the time to get to read her books. I'm John
Thank you,
DeDakis,
John.
and you've been one-to-one with me, and I've been one-to-one with Amy. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Bye.